Vivid verses.
I've lived in Ashford, Colorado long enough to know the difference between a town that's dying and a town that's resting. Ashford is resting. The kind of place where the diner on Callaway Street still has the same booze it had in 1987, where the hardware store is independently owned, and where people wave at you from their trucks even if they've never met you. I moved here from Chicago 3 years ago after my consulting firm went fully remote, and I've never once questioned the decision. My name is Connor Reeves. I'm 34. I run a small operational efficiency practice out of my home office, which overlooks a half-acre of blue spruce trees and a creek that freezes over in December. I wake up at 5:15 every morning, run 6 miles, make pour-over coffee, and work until noon. My afternoons are mine. I cook well, read widely, and maintain a circle of friends that's deliberately small but solid. I tell you this not to establish myself as some kind of extraordinary individual, because I'm not. I tell you this because context matters, and I want you to understand the particular quality of life I had built before Nadia Callas came into it. She arrived in Ashford in late March, when the last of the winter stubborn enough to hang around finally gave up. She'd taken the lease on the apartment above the Ironwood Cafe on Percival Avenue, which I knew because my friend Pete Danvers owned the building and mentioned it when we were having drinks at his place one Friday evening. "Teacher," Pete said, topping off my glass of Garrison Brothers bourbon. "Transferred in from Denver. Some kind of curriculum specialist with the county." She asked me if the pipes were reliable. I told her yes. She said, "Good, because the last place I rented, the landlord refused to fix anything, and I had to fight with him for 8 months." First thing she told me. I noted that, but didn't file it anywhere specific. People establish context. It's natural. I met her 3 weeks later at a dinner party at the home of my friends Ray and Claudia Ferris. Ray taught at the same school where Nadia had been placed, and Claudia was the kind of warm, impulsive host who believed that anyone new to town deserved a proper welcome. There were 8 of us around the table. The food was excellent. Claudia had made a short rib braise that could have made a lesser man weep. And the conversation moved the way good dinner party conversation does, organically and without anyone trying too hard. Nadia sat across from me. She was striking in the way that makes you look twice, not because of any one feature, but because everything about her was cohesive. Dark hair, precise posture, a way of listening that made you feel like whatever you were saying was the most interesting thing she'd heard in weeks. She was funny in a dry, sideways way that I appreciated. She asked good questions. She didn't perform. I was interested. I don't apologize for that. We talked for most of the dinner, and when Claudia brought out her lemon tart and the conversation fragmented into smaller threads, Nadia and I stayed in our own. She told me she'd grown up in Tucson, spent her 20s in Denver, and had decided to step back from what she called the chaos of a big city. I told her Ashford would give her the quiet she was after, and she said she hoped so. "Denver was a lot," she said. "In what way?" She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that's deployed to change subjects rather than open them. "In every way." I walked her to her car that night. The evening had turned sharp, and she'd forgotten a jacket, and we exchanged numbers. She texted me the following Tuesday to say she'd found a good running trail on the north side of the reservoir and wanted to know if I had any others to recommend. I recommended 3. She tried them all and reported back on each one with enough specificity that I knew she'd actually run them. That kind of follow-through matters to me. We had coffee at the end of April, then dinner in early May, a place in town called Elm and Ember with food good enough to justify the prices. She was excellent company. Sharp. Present. I found myself looking forward to seeing her, which I don't take lightly. I'm not someone who moves quickly or invests carelessly. By the end of May, we were spending most weekends together. The first thing I noticed was small enough that I nearly dismissed it. We were at a barbecue at my neighbor Owen Trask's house. Maybe 15 people, patio strung with Edison bulbs, Someone had brought a cooler full of Coppaline ale, the good local stuff. I've been talking with Owen's brother-in-law about a remodeling project and had drifted away from Nadia for maybe 40 minutes. When I came back to her, she was mid-conversation with two women I didn't know, and her body language had shifted in a way I can only describe as heightened, not animated exactly, but slightly overpressurized, the way someone looks when they're narrating something rather than recalling it. And she just pulled me into this completely out of nowhere, Nadia was saying. I had no idea any of it was going on, and suddenly I'm the one dealing with the fallout. That's just how she operated. Everything had to go through me before it could become her problem. The two women nodded sympathetically. I didn't know who she was talking about. I didn't ask. People vent. But over the following weeks, I started paying attention to the frequency with which Nadia told stories that fit a particular shape. The shape was this: something goes wrong. Nadia is at or near the center of it, and the cause is always someone else. It wasn't that she never mentioned fault. She mentioned it constantly. She just never assigned it to herself. Her previous landlord in Denver had been negligent and difficult. Her supervisor at her last school had been jealous of her and had undermined her at every opportunity. A friend named Kara had betrayed her confidence and turned mutual friends against her. Her college roommate had been manipulative. A relationship before Denver, a man named Timothy, had been emotionally unavailable and eventually unfaithful. A relationship before Timothy, a man she never named, had been controlling. I'm not suggesting any of these people were without fault. I'm a realist, not a romantic. Difficult landlords exist. Jealous supervisors exist. People betray confidences. Unfaithful partners are unfortunately common. What I noticed was the ratio. Every relationship in Nadia's past, professional, personal, romantic, had ended with her as the wrong party. Not occasionally, universally. Statistically, that's worth examining. I started tracking, mentally, not obsessively. I wasn't running a case against her. I genuinely liked her. But I'm a man who makes his living identifying where processes break down, and the process of how a person moves through relationships is not fundamentally different from the process of how an organization manages its operations. You look for patterns. Patterns tell you more than incidents. The pattern I was identifying was not reassuring. A Saturday in late June, we'd driven up to Barton Lake for the day, about 40 minutes outside Ashford, and rented a canoe from the outfitter near the North Trailhead, a place called Ridgeback Outdoors. Nadia had wanted to come for weeks. I'd packed a lunch. The morning was clean and blue. We were out on the water for maybe an hour when she brought up her colleague at the school, a woman named Priya, who was apparently also a curriculum specialist and had, in Nadia's account, been taking credit for collaborative work and presenting their joint proposals as primarily her own. She's done it twice now, Nadia said. Last Tuesday, she walked out of a meeting with Henderson and didn't say a word to me about what was discussed. That's not how this is supposed to work. Have you talked to her about it directly? I asked. She looked at me from the bow. The look was brief, but specific. The look of someone who considers a question misdirected. I've tried. How did that go? She was defensive, turned it back on me, said I wasn't being a team player. What did you say? I told her I'd document everything from now on. That was actually a reasonable response, and I said so. But then I asked, is there any chance she has a different read on how the collaboration's been going? The pause that followed was several seconds long. When Nadia spoke, her voice was level, but there was something behind it that had pulled back slightly, like a door not quite closed. Connor, I know how the collaboration has been going. I'm in it. Sure, I said. I'm just asking whether she might have a different perspective. She might have a perspective. That doesn't make it accurate. I'll let it go. But I noted it. Not just what she said, that people can have inaccurate perspectives, which is true, but the way the question had been received. I'd offered a minor reframe. a standard analytical move, and she treated it as a challenge to her credibility. I thought about that canoe ride for a few days afterward. The clarity came not from a single revelation, but from an accumulation of data points, the way a picture develops, gradually, then all at once. Dinner at my place on a Thursday in July. I made salmon and croûte with an herb cream sauce and a Napa Pinot I'd been saving for a good occasion. Nadia brought flowers, which she always did. She had that particular warmth in gestures. And we ate on the back deck while the creek made its low sound below the spruce trees. Somewhere in the second glass of wine, she mentioned Kara again, the friend from Denver who had, in the telling I'd heard before, turned mutual friends against her. This time the story had more detail. Kara told Megan, who told me, that I'd said things about Megan's relationship that I never said. She just fabricated it, or misrepresented something I said out of context. Either way, Megan stopped speaking to me for almost a year. Did you ever find out what Kara said you said? That I thought Megan was making a mistake with her boyfriend, which I did think, but I never said it to Kara. Or if I did, it was once in passing and not in the way she apparently framed it. I turned that over. If I did, it was once in passing. So you might have said it, I said, lightly, no edge in it. She set down her wine glass. I might have mentioned something vaguely similar. That's completely different from what Kara told Megan. Right, I said, but Kara might not have been fabricating. She might have passed on what you said inaccurately, maybe with her own interpretation added, without realizing she was misrepresenting you. That's different from deliberately lying about you. Nadia looked at me for a moment. Why are you defending Kara? I'm not defending Kara. I don't know Kara. I'm just offering another explanation besides intentional betrayal. You weren't there. I know. I've known Kara for 9 years. I know what she's capable of. Okay, I said. The evening recovered. We talked about other things. The salmon was excellent, if I say so myself. She left around 10 and texted me a picture of the moon over the reservoir when she got home, which was a lovely thing to do. But I sat on my deck for another hour after she left, and I thought with some precision about where things were going. I was not, I realized, going to be exempt from the pattern. No one was. The pattern didn't discriminate. It was not selective about who became a chapter in the ledger. I thought about the landlord in Denver, the supervisor, Kara, Timothy, the unnamed man before Timothy, the colleagues and the friends and the family members who had, in Nadia's comprehensive accounting, each failed her in their specific way. None of these people were present to offer their version. None of them ever would be, as far as Nadia was concerned. The trial had concluded before the defense spoke. And here was the part one couldn't get past. I liked her. That was the difficult thing. She wasn't a bad person. She was funny and thoughtful and genuinely attentive in the ways that mattered to me. She was good at her work by all external accounts. She loved her family, her mother and a younger brother in Tucson, and spoke of them with uncomplicated warmth. But she carried this thing, this immovable conviction that she moved through the world blameless, and that every wound she'd ever sustained was purely external in origin. And I knew, not feared, knew, that the day would come when I would do something or fail to do something or misread something or not misread anything at all, but simply exist in a way that didn't align with what she needed in that moment, and I would become another entry in the ledger. Another name in the long catalog of people who hadn't understood her, who had let her down, who had failed to be what she needed them to be. I was not willing to accept that outcome passively. I was not willing to wait for it to arrive. I took a week to think. I didn't manufacture distance. I saw her twice that week, once for a run and once for lunch on Callaway Street, and I was fully present for both. I wanted to be certain I wasn't reacting. I wanted to be certain I was deciding. There's a difference between those two things, and it matters. By the end of the week, I was certain. This was a decision. Quiet, clear, arrive at the same way I approach every significant move, through observation, through analysis, and without the distortion of either wishful thinking or unnecessary emotion. I was not angry at Nadia. I want to be specific about that. She wasn't malicious. What she was arrested, stuck in a model of herself and the world that had calcified at some point and that she'd never been challenged or perhaps never been willing to revise. That's a human condition. It's not a crime, but it was incompatible with the kind of relationship I was capable of having, because the kind of relationship I'm capable of having requires the other person to be able to sit with their own role in things. I don't need a partner who is self-flagellating or falsely modest. I need someone who can say I contributed to that when they contributed to it. That's the minimum. Nadia couldn't do that. Not because she was dishonest. I don't think she was conscious of it. I think the narrative she carried had been built over so many years and reinforced by so many sympathetic listeners that it had become invisible to her. She wasn't lying. She believed every word of what she told me. That was, in its own way, the most significant problem. I called her on a Saturday morning in early August because I wasn't going to do this over text, and I wasn't going to let it drag into a dinner where the timing would be wrong. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, I was just about to text you. I found a trail above the reservoir that goes up to a ridge. The view's supposed to be incredible. Sounds like a good one," I said. "Hey, can you talk for a few minutes?" A brief pause. She heard something in my voice. She was perceptive. I'll give her that. Sure. I didn't frame it as a verdict. I didn't deliver it as an indictment. I told her that I'd valued the time we'd spent together and that I meant that without qualification. I told her I'd been thinking carefully about where things were going and that I didn't think we were the right fit in the long run. "Can you tell me why?" she said. Her voice was steady. This was the part I'd thought about most carefully. I could be evasive. Compatibility is a legitimate and commonly deployed explanation that requires nothing further. I could say it's not the right time, or I think we want different things, both of which contain enough truth to be defensible. But I respected her. Evasion wasn't respectful. "I've noticed a pattern," I said. "In the stories you've told me about your past, relationships, friendships, professional situations, the person who ends up at fault is always someone other than you. Every time. I've been paying attention to this for a couple of months now, and I haven't found an exception. Silence. That doesn't mean the people in those situations weren't at fault," I continued. "Some of them clearly were. But when the pattern is that consistent across that many different relationships over that many years, it tells me that accountability isn't something you factor into your own experience. And for me, that's a fundamental incompatibility, because at some point, I'll become another name in that list. And I'm not willing to wait for that." Another pause. When she spoke, her voice had changed. There was a controlled quality to it now, like someone holding a glass very carefully. That's an extraordinary thing to say to someone. It might be, but I think it's fair. "So you've been analyzing me, keeping score." "I've been paying attention," I said, "the same way I pay attention to everything." "And you've decided I'm some kind of what? Narcissist? Incapable of responsibility?" I didn't say that. I said I've observed a consistent pattern that I don't think I can work with. Those aren't the same thing. "The last person who said something like this to me was Timothy," she said, and her voice had gone somewhere flat and final. "Right before he cheated." I'll let that sit for exactly one moment. I understand that you want that to be a parallel, but him doing something wrong after saying something doesn't make the thing he said wrong. She didn't answer that. "I wish you well, Nadia." "I mean that," I said. "Ashford's a small town, and I'd like to be civil when we see each other." She said, "Sure," in the tone of someone who is not sure at all, and she ended the call. That was a Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, Pete Danvers called me. He'd heard from Nadia. Apparently, they'd had a brief exchange when she'd run into him at the farmer's market on Callaway Street that morning. She said you broke up with her? Pete said. Accurate. She said you told her you'd been studying her like a subject. Her words. Somewhat less accurate. You want to talk about it? Not particularly, I said. But I'll say this. I made the right call. Pete had known me long enough not to push. Fair enough, he said. You coming to my thing next Saturday? Lisa's making that mushroom pasta. I'll be there, I said. I made coffee and sat by the window that faces the spruce trees and the creek. The morning was clear and warm, and the creek was doing what it always does, moving past without ceremony. 2 days later, I ran into Claudia Ferris at the Ironwood Cafe while I was picking up a bag of their single-origin beans. She was polite, but there was a careful quality to it, a faint social recalibration. She'd heard something. Through what channel, I didn't know, but in a town the size of Ashford, information moves the way water moves along the easiest path. I bought my coffee and asked how Ray was doing and said we should all have dinner soon, and I meant it. Claudia warmed slightly, the way she does when she feels a situation might be manageable. I wasn't concerned about my reputation in Ashford. My standing in this town was built on 3 years of showing up with integrity, and one relationship that didn't work wasn't going to restructure that. I also wasn't going to rush around defending my decision to anyone who hadn't asked. That kind of movement signals insecurity, and I wasn't insecure. I made a clear-eyed call. What I was observant enough to notice the early architecture of a narrative being assembled. The clearest view I got of that architecture came about 3 weeks later at Ray and Claudia's. A smaller dinner than usual, just the 4 of us, the kind of intimate evening where the conversation eventually goes somewhere real whether you intended it to or not. After dinner, while Ray was opening his second bottle of the Sonoma Zinfandel he'd been enthusiastic about for weeks, Claudia said, with the careful precision of someone who had been thinking about whether to say something for most of the meal, she told me you said she was emotionally defective. I looked at Claudia with as much neutrality as I could manage. I didn't say that. I didn't think you would. What I said, I continued, was that I'd observed a pattern of accountability avoidance, and that I didn't think we were compatible. I said it once to her directly. I didn't editorialize. Ray came back with the wine and looked between us with the practiced calm of a man married to Claudia for 12 years, which meant he'd learned to read the air. He poured without commenting. She was pretty upset, Claudia said, with enough genuine sympathy in it that I could tell she wasn't trying to start something. I understand that, I said. Being told something honest you don't want to hear tends to produce upset. She said you were cold about it. I was direct about it. Those aren't the same thing. Ray tasted the Zinfandel and appeared pleased with himself. Good, he said to no one in particular. Claudia considered me for a moment. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think there's any chance you were wrong? About the pattern? I gave that question the space it deserved, because it deserved it. Not because I hadn't already answered it, but because Claudia was asking sincerely and deserved a sincere response. I think there's always some chance, I said. I'm not infallible, but I reviewed it carefully. I wasn't looking for problems. I spent the better part of 2 months hoping I was misreading something. I wasn't. She nodded slowly. Not a concession, exactly, but the nod of someone filing information. For what it's worth, Ray said, still ostensibly addressing his wine glass. The story she told at the school is that you were running some kind of evaluation on her the whole time, and that you broke up with her because she scored poorly. I said nothing for a moment, because the absurdity of it required a breath before it could be addressed calmly. I paid attention to the person I was in a relationship with and made a decision based on what I observed. That's not an evaluation. No, Ray agreed. It's called knowing your mind. Ray, Claudia said in the tone that means in that line of thought. He topped off my glass instead. See, here's the thing about the narrative Nadia was building. I watched it happen in real time, and I watched it with an absence of anger that surprised even me. Not because I'm incapable of anger, but because the narrative was so exactly what I'd expected that I couldn't find room to be surprised by it, let alone heated. She had taken the thing I'd said to her, dissolved the specifics, and recast it as a general cruelty. She had made me unknowable, running an evaluation, rather than allowing me to be what I actually was, which was someone who'd watched carefully, thought clearly, and done something unusual, said the truth plainly rather than hiding behind politeness. And in doing so, she had begun the process of converting me into the next chapter. I had joined the ledger. There I was, between the jealous supervisor and Timothy, Connor Reeves of Ashford, Colorado, who had been cold and clinical and had made her feel like a case study. I would be lied about, but not with malice. That's the part that took me the longest to settle. She wasn't a bad person who lied about people. She was a person who genuinely experienced reality through a lens that required her to be the wrong party, and who then, without knowing she was doing it, shaped the story to fit that requirement. The framing would solidify over time. It would accrue details the way stories do. In a year, maybe two, there would be specifics she remembered as facts that had never happened. She would believe them completely. And the sympathetic listeners, and there would be many, because Nadia was charming and she'd just arrived in a new town and she'd been burned by someone, would receive each detail with a nod of people who understood. And I would be the distant, calculating man who had never really cared. That would be the version that survived. I could not prevent it. I did not try. What I could do was something simpler and more important. I could know what actually happened. I could hold that cleanly, without revision, without drama, without needing anyone else to confirm it. That's the part that people who play the long version of Nadia's game often don't anticipate. Some of the people they add to the ledger don't need to contest it. Some of them are just fine. Owen Trask's Labor Day barbecue. Same backyard as the 4th of July. Same Edison bulbs. Someone had switched out the Coppeline Ale for a newer local lager called Buckhorn Draft that had launched out of a brewery in Fort Crane. Tasted like a proper Pilsner, and I approved. Nadia was there. I'd known she might be. Ashford wasn't large enough to pretend otherwise. She was with a group near the back fence, a couple of people from the school, someone I didn't recognize. She was laughing at something full and real, and she looked comfortable in the way you look comfortable when you've settled into a new social landscape. She'd been in town less than 6 months and already had a circle. I'd have expected nothing less. She was good at that. We made eye contact once across the backyard. Brief. She didn't look away aggressively, and I didn't hold the gaze. We both did the very human thing of acknowledging each other's existence without requiring further ceremony. Half an hour later, we ended up in proximity at the table where Owen had set up the food. She was loading a plate with the kind of focused attention people sometimes use to avoid conversation. "Hey," I said. She glanced up. "Hey, how's the new trail? The one above the reservoir?" A half-second pause. She wasn't expecting that. "Good. Worth the climb." I figure it would be. That was it. We each moved on with our plates and our conversations in our separate orbits within the same backyard. No performance on either side. No Cold War. Just two adults in a small town who had something brief and had ended it and were both going to keep living here. Pete materialized at my elbow with 2 Buckhorn Drafts. He handed me one. "That was remarkably civil," he said quietly. It was a 10-second conversation about trail. In this town, at this party, that qualifies as diplomatic. I drank the lager. It really was good. I made note to look up the Fort Crane Brewery. In October, I took a contract with a distribution company based in Flagstaff, Arizona that required 3 weeks of on-site work. I drove down through southern Colorado and into the desert, and I remembered why I'd always had a complicated love for that landscape. The way it was simultaneously spare and overwhelming, nothing to look at and everything to look at, and how it clarified thought in a way that even my 6-mile morning runs didn't fully achieve. I work hard. The project was complex, a warehouse operation with 3 distinct failure points that had been compounding each other for 18 months without anyone having the clarity to identify the connection. By the end of week 2, I'd mapped all 3 and delivered a remediation plan that their operations director called the most useful thing they'd had cross his desk in 2 years. I finished on a Thursday, ahead of schedule, which is the way I prefer to finish. I drove back to Ashford on a Saturday, through the San Juan Mountains with the aspen trees at their full October yellow, whole hillsides gone luminous and gold, and I thought without deliberateness about the last 7 months. I thought about what was good because there was good. Nadia was interesting and capable, and she'd added something real to those months. The dinners, the trails, the conversations about everything from educational policy to the structural dishonesty of motivational culture. She had a mind I'd enjoyed. That was not retroactively erased by how it ended. I also thought about the thing I'd done that I didn't always get credit for. Not from others, but from myself. I'd left before the damage. Not during the damage. Not after accumulating so much of it that the exit was a crisis before. Because I'd paid attention, and I'd thought clearly, and I'd acted on what I knew rather than on what I wished were true. That's not a small thing. Most people don't do it. Most people either miss the signals entirely or see them and gamble that the good will outweigh it and lose. I don't gamble. Not with things that matter. November in Ashford comes with a particular kind of light. Low and gold, and slightly melancholy in the way of all northern autumn light, though Ashford is high enough that by mid-month you're really getting winter preview. The creek behind my house iced at its edges. I started a fire in the wood stove in the evenings, and the spruce trees outside went very still in the cold. I had dinner with Ray and Claudia at their place on a Thursday in early November. Ray's mother was visiting from Santa Fe, a woman in her late 60s named Rosalind who'd spent 30 years as a civil engineer and had the very particular confidence of someone who has spent a career solving concrete problems. I liked her immediately. Ray tells me you're a consultant, she said over the first course. Operational efficiency, I said. Mostly manufacturing and distribution, some service industries. I find where things are breaking down and why. She tilted her head with interest. You must develop a tolerance for people being resistant to your conclusions. It's part of the work, I said. When you tell someone their process has a failure point, the first instinct is usually to defend the process. It's not personal. People have ownership over the things they've built. You learn to deliver the information in a way that doesn't activate the defensiveness. And if it activates anyway, then you document everything, make your recommendations in writing, and let the outcome do the convincing. She smiled. Good answer. Claudia, who had been listening to this exchange with the particular alertness she has when she's triangulating, said nothing through the first course, and then during the second. A good mushroom risotto, said, almost casually, Nadia's moving. I took a moment before responding. Back to Denver? Fort Collins. There's a curriculum position she applied for. She got it. I nodded. That's a good fit for her. Fort Collins is a good city. Ray glanced at me with the brief curiosity of a man who never pries but notices everything. Rosalind looked at her risotto. She seemed happy about it, Claudia added, and I understood that she was offering me something, a kind of clearing of the air, confirmation that the story had an ending that didn't require anyone to have been truly destroyed. Good, I said, and I meant it. She left in the second week of December. I didn't see her go. Ashford doesn't announce these things. People leave and the town adjusts, the way towns always do. I found out when Pete texted me. New tenant in the Percival apartment, retired geologist from Albuquerque. Quiet. Didn't ask about the pipes. I laughed at that. Actually laughed in the empty kitchen on a Tuesday morning with my pour-over coffee, at the clarity of what that last sentence was doing. Pete Danvers is a man who knows how to land a sentence. I thought about her one more time, an honest accounting, the way I prefer things. I thought about what I'd seen clearly and what I'd done with it. I thought about the version of this story she was carrying out of Ashford, in which I was the careful, analytical man who'd been watching her like a puzzle, who'd been cold, who'd fit neatly alongside the landlord and Timothy and Kara in the comprehensive record of everyone who hadn't been good enough to her. And then I thought about this. She would take that version to Fort Collins. She would meet someone there, someone else who was smart and found her interesting and wanted to see where it went. And maybe that person would see what I saw and make the same call I made. Or maybe they wouldn't see it, and they'd stay until the damage accumulated and the exit was painful and complicated. Or maybe, and I held this possibility without dismissing it, she would meet someone, and the collision of this new relationship with a new city and a new chapter would shake something loose, and she would have a moment of actual accounting, the kind where you sit with a ledger and ask which entries are fully accurate. I didn't know which it would be. It wasn't mine to know.
Thanks for listening.